In a rural part of Ohio, near a small city, I was raised. Since I was a child, I have always believed in what can be seen and touched. Therefore, I don't believe in superstition. However, after purchasing a dairy farm, I had a very eerie encounter, which forced me to dispose of the land shortly thereafter. I bought the property from an old man named Joe. He was known to be a bit odd, but his dairy farm was in great shape. I was the third owner, and many renovations had been made since it was built. The price was fair. All the machinery was functioning at full capacity. The profits were excellent, and it was a good deal. The place was perfect to start my life as a farmer. It didn't take more than a week for the strange occurrences to begin. The first thing I noticed were the cows. Animals are sensitive to changes, but this was different. They were restless, often looking towards the dense forest surrounding the farm. At night, they mooed incessantly, as if scared of something I couldn't see. The strangest part was that when I shone my strong flashlights, I saw nothing but felt an unsettling sensation of being watched. I rose very early one morning when I heard footsteps around the house. I carried a torch and moved to the door, expecting to see some animal like a coyote or a dog. But there was nothing. Everything was quiet, except for the gentle wind rustling the tree leaves. I decided to walk around the property, checking if there was any problem with the machinery or elsewhere on the farm. As I walked through the barn, I noticed a shadow moving quickly. It seemed human, but when I got closer, no one was there. I thought I might be tired and seeing things, so I went back home, but the discomfort lingered, and it began to intrigue me. The following days were equally disturbing. Every night I heard strange noises, as if someone was walking around the farm. The dogs barked at nothing, and the cows remained restless. One morning at dawn, I found footprints in the mud around the barn. They were from boots, large and heavy. I didn't recognize those marks, and no one I knew wore boots of that kind. The following week, a strong storm hit the farm. The wind was intense, and the rain battered the house's roof. During the night, I heard knocks on the front door amid the storm. I hesitated a bit and asked, "Who is it?" But no one answered. I decided to open the door. A very tall man stood there, drenched from the rain with a lost look in his eyes. He asked to use the phone, saying his car had broken down on the road. I let him in, though something about him made me uneasy. While he used the phone, I noticed his clothes were old, as if from another era. He finished the call quickly and left without saying goodbye, disappearing into the storm as if he didn't notice the rain. After that, the nighttime noises intensified. The dogs wouldn't stop barking. One night, I decided to stay awake and watch the farm. Armed with my shotgun and a revolver, I sat on the porch, waiting to see if someone would appear. Around midnight, I saw a faint light coming from the barn. I walked towards it, trying to be as quiet as possible. When I got there, I saw a man standing in the middle of the barn, holding a lantern and looking down. It was the man who had appeared during the storm and used my phone. His gaze met mine, and I felt a sudden chill. Just then, he vanished. In a manner so contrary to human nature that it seemed like he never existed at all, not someone hurrying off hastily. I reached home again, shaken by shivers, bafflement, and terror. The following days were a blur of strange events. The cows began to fall ill for no apparent reason, and some even died. I called a vet, but he couldn't find the cause. He said he had never seen anything like it. I found out through neighboring farmers that a family known for being strange had once lived on that farm. As I was the fourth owner, a lot had already happened there. The man who built the farm was known to be cruel and violent. He mysteriously disappeared after a series of misfortunes plagued the farm. This discovery disturbed me even more. I decided I didn't want to stay there any longer. Despite being a good business deal and fulfilling a dream, I preferred to sell it. I couldn't keep living in that haunted place. If only I had known this before, I wouldn't have bought it. After placing my ranch on offer, Paranormal activities appeared to intensify with each passing day. One night I woke up due to loud cries that seemed to have emanated from the shed located at the rear end of the homestead. I rushed there only to find all cows behaving like they were haunted by an invisible ghost, hence making nonsense muffled sound as they made random movements within their enclosures. All this while noticing some stranger standing right at center inside shed. He didn't vanish at that moment, but instead turned around to look at me from far end, before giving deservedly contemptuous smirk upon his face, saying, "This place isn't yours." Those words were etched into my mind like a vivid nightmare. I ran out of the barn feeling the weight of 1,000 invisible eyes on me. I locked all the doors and windows of the house, trying to fend off the sensation of being watched. But the feeling of insecurity and fear continued to surround me. I had never been so scared in my life. I grabbed my gun and stayed locked inside the house. I didn't hear anything else, and everything calmed down. During the day, the farm seemed more peaceful, almost normal. There were no strange or supernatural events. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my imagination, a result of the hard work and isolation. However, the nights remained unsettling. One afternoon, a neighbor, Mr. Thompson, called upon me. For many years now, he had been an old inhabitant of the place. On talking of the peculiar happenings, his silence made me pause. And then slowly, as if debating with himself whether he would tell it or not, at last came forth with something which froze my marrow in me. Mr. Thompson said the farm's former owner was Elias Carter. He was a vicious ruler who maltreated both his household and workers. He is believed to have lost his mind during one stormy night and killed his spouse and kids before he dumped them in the bordering woods. He was never seen again immediately after this incident that occurred. Some say his spirit still roams here, trapped by guilt and hatred, Mr. Thompson said with a somber look. "I think you found more than you bargained for when you bought this farm, young man." That night, the fear was even more palpable. I decided it was time to find out what was really happening. Armed with a flashlight and my shotgun, I returned to the barn. The darkness seemed denser than usual. After a couple of minutes, the barn was filled with a stuffy air. I suddenly sensed a cold breeze and an unclear sound. Upon looking back, Elias Carter was observed in the middle of the barn, with his eyes blank and full of bitterness. "You shouldn't have come," he said. He began walking towards me before I realized what was happening, and my chest had this heavy pain that seemed like it wanted to squeeze my heart to pulp. The torch suddenly went off. I panicked, shot from the shotgun, only for it disappear into thin air, just like in those horror films when you are half asleep. Running frantically back to the house this time, my hand shaking as I tried locking the door behind me, then suddenly collapsed amidst the heavy breaths. I locked my door from within. It felt like all hope was lost, given what had happened earlier in those bushes. And this house could never be safe enough. The sinister farm could not be contested with mundane weapons. The next morning, without wasting any time, I put the farm up for sale at any price. I told the broker not to mention anything about the strange events, but to accept any offer. I needed to get out of there. Within a week, I sold the farm for half the price I had paid, losing a lot of money. The days that followed were a blur. I finally found a house in the city, where I hoped to start my life anew. I no longer wanted to be a farmer after all that. Nightmares about Elias Carter continued to haunt me. It was not easy. A few weeks later, I received a call from the farm's new owner. He wanted to know about some necessary repairs. There was a curious tone in his voice, as if he wanted to ask something more but didn't. I knew he would eventually discover what I already knew. Today, as I write this account, I feel as if he is watching me. Sometimes I still hear those footsteps outside my house, but it might be in my head. After all, I am far from the farm. Elias Carter's farm remains there, and I can only hope I never have to face something like that again. And for those who do not believe in the supernatural, I hope you never experience anything like it either. Sometimes it's better not to believe and not feel it firsthand. Please like and subscribe if you are enjoying. The farm where we lived was always a quiet place, but on a Friday night the tranquility vanished. My parents had gone on a trip and would only be absent for one day, which is why I was left with my brother Lucas, who is younger than me. Lucas is 12 while I'm 15. At first we were happy about it because there was no limit of time for playing video games or eating anything, but soon enough realized that there is no one but us who could tell what to do. While we were in the living room watching a movie, eating popcorn and drinking soda, we heard knocks at the door. For him to drop by, especially at such an hour, was rare. I looked at Lucas apprehensively, and he was as pale as a ghost. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen before opening the door, scared of what it might be. Suddenly more knocks, louder this time. A voice shouted from outside, "Is anyone home?" I was scared out of my wits and replied, "Yes, I'm opening the door." A man was outside, looking to be in his 40s, sweaty and out of breath as if he were running from something. He said his truck had broken down on the nearby road and he needed help. But something was off about this guy. I invited him in and asked if he needed help, with the best intentions. The man sat on the couch and began to explain how his truck suddenly stopped working while eating our popcorn. His eyes were restless, constantly checking the door and windows as if expecting someone to arrive. My brother was next to me, visibly trembling with fear. He asked to use the phone, saying he wanted to call a tow truck. He called and spoke with someone, asking for help. Afterward, he requested a glass of water. While he drank, I looked at Lucas and whispered that something was wrong. The man then began to ask personal questions, trying to find out if we were alone, how old we were, and saying it was dangerous for two kids to be alone in a house on such an isolated farm. I said our parents were sleeping, but he didn't seem to believe me. Soon after, he said he needed to return to his truck. I offered to help to see what he would say, but he refused. When he left, we locked the door and ran upstairs. From up there, we saw that he wasn't heading towards the road, but was instead prowling around the house, peeking through windows, looking for something. He didn't know we were in the room also peeking through the window. I grabbed the phone and called the police, as my dad had taught me in dangerous situations. Call the police first, then him. I tried to keep my voice low while explaining the situation. The dispatcher said a patrol car was on the way, but that it might take a while due to our location. We heard footsteps around the house and the sound of doors and windows being tested. Lucas was terrified, and so was I. The man had just been inside our house. We decided to lock ourselves in our parents' room, which had a stronger lock. We stayed silent, listening for any movement. The noise outside suddenly stopped, making us more tense than ever. Suddenly, we began to hear footsteps inside the house. Panic overtook us. The sound of footsteps in the hallway grew closer, moving slowly to avoid being heard. Lucas held my hand, scared to death, and I could feel his cold sweat. I tried to calm him, but my own voice was shaking. There was no doubt this man intended harm. The sound of footsteps stopped in front of the bedroom door. The heavy breathing on the other side was clear. The silence was interrupted by slow, strong knocks on the door. The lock seemed fragile under the pressure. I looked at Lucas and whispered for him to hide in the closet. He obeyed immediately, almost without making a sound. The knocking stopped, but the ensuing silence was even worse. The doorknob began to turn slowly, as if the intruder was testing our last line of defense. I gripped the knife tighter, trying to prepare for whatever came next. Out of nowhere, we heard sirens blaring from afar. Whoever or whatever it was at the other side of the door took a moment of pause before quickly retreating back. I opened the curtain and saw some police cars' lights approaching. The relief was instant. Nevertheless, we were still not safe. Again, The knocking began with more urgency this time. It was an urgent shout from a cop requesting us to let him in. We rushed down after I opened the bedroom's door. Lucas shook like he had a fever, and I couldn't remain calm. We opened the door and were greeted by 2 armed police officers. They led us outside, and a 3rd officer entered the house to search. Outside, they asked us quick questions about what had happened. We reported everything we could, though our voices were shaky and confused. Meanwhile, the officer inside the house returned. He said he didn't find anyone but found clear signs that someone had forced several windows. They took us to the patrol car and said it would be better for us to spend the night at the station for safety. At the station, we were placed in a waiting room. Our parents were contacted and informed of what had happened, but were reassured that we were safe. While we waited, the police continued to ask detailed questions about the man we had seen. We described his appearance and behavior as best we could. Hours passed, and finally, our parents arrived. They were visibly shaken, but relieved that we were safe. They said we should never have opened the door. The officers explained the situation to them and assured them they would patrol the farm area frequently in the coming days to ensure safety. We returned home the next morning, accompanied by our parents and escorted by a police patrol car. The house was silent and exactly as we left it, but the feeling of safety was completely gone. We spent the day changing locks and installing extra locks on all doors and windows. That night, we all slept in the same room with the lights on. Exhaustion finally overcame us, but we slept poorly, thinking about the previous night. Lucas woke up several times, scared, and I was no different. I was also shaken. In the following days, the police continued to investigate and conduct night patrols, but they found no concrete leads on the man. Nothing beyond signs that someone had been there. The community around the farm was on high alert, and everyone started taking extra precautions. The tranquility of rural life had been irreversibly disturbed. Time passed, but the feeling of insecurity persisted. After experiencing something like that, you realize anything can happen. The man who appeared that night was never seen again. We took precautions, installed security cameras, and increased our vigilance, always remaining alert. That event left deep marks. Lucas and I were never the same, of course. We grew up too fast, learning that danger could be at our door at any moment, even in the places we considered the safest. It's always good to stay alert. In this world, we need to be wide awake and attentive to everything and everyone. That night taught us many life lessons. We were lucky. I am Carlos, and this story happened a long time ago. I am now 42, but that night comes back to me as clearly as it was yesterday. My sister was 8 years old when I was 11, and my brother 9 at that time. We were all kids. At our grandfather's farm, an old massive wooden construction site situated in a rural area where we used to spend summer holidays, stood several meters away from another very old, gigantic maize plantation patch-linked house. My grandfather was telling stories from his youth as usual. In the evening, we were in the living room having dinner. The air smelled good because of fresh coffee while the fireplace was heating up with firewood. Afterwards, the children upstairs went to bed while their parents slept in the room next to downstairs, along with our grandparents. I awoke suddenly in the dead of night because of a peculiar whistle sounded on the field. There was this high-pitched sound of a whistle breaking the calmness of the night. My siblings Clara and Paolo woke up too. "Did you hear that?" I asked them. They nodded. We heard it. The sound came from outside, from the cornfield. We approached the window to look, scared. Outside, in the total darkness, we saw someone running between the rows of corn. It wasn't a normal run. The person was too fast to be human. Suddenly it whistled again, louder and more insistent, as if calling us. Clara held my hand tightly. We tried to wake our parents, but they slept deeply, as if they were under a spell. "What do we do?" Paolo asked. "Stay quiet," I said. "Let's wait and see what happens." We went back to the window and saw it again. The thing standing in the middle of the corn, looking at our window. Paolo suggested closing the curtains and going back to bed, but we couldn't move. We were paralyzed by fear. Suddenly the creature disappeared into the cornfield, leaving a heavy silence. We went back to our beds, but we couldn't sleep. We stayed still, listening for any sound that might indicate the return of that thing. But the night passed, and it didn't come back. The next morning, we told our grandparents and parents everything. They said it might have been just our imagination, but didn't dismiss the idea that it could be real, saying that in such cases we should call the adults anyway. They also said the corn can play tricks on you, and that we might have heard the wind rustling the corn leaves. But we knew it wasn't the wind. Something was out there that night, and I'm sure it was something or someone. Our grandfather, upon hearing this, became serious. He told us that years ago, a strange man appeared on the farm asking for information. Shortly after, strange things started to happen. Animals disappeared or were found dead in horrible ways. One day the man disappeared, but the events continued for a while. My grandfather never knew who the man was or what he wanted, but the story was never forgotten. Who knows if it wasn't that same man from back then? Many years have passed and we've never heard of any more incidents. We rarely visited the farm after that, and we never slept there again. Please like and subscribe. And if you watched until the end, leave a comment. I want to know if you like the videos.